carry them all. It's like a yeah.
Brian's door is open.
Recording in progress.
Al, just want to confirm that you can hear us okay.
Yep, I can. Thank you.
All right, it's 7 o'clock, and I'm going to call the June 13th, 2022 meeting of the Mansfield Town Council to order. First item on the agenda is roll call. Ms. Jane?
Osberger.
Here.
Berthelot.
Ms. Berthelot has a conflict with the family obligation.
Bruder. Coleman.
Here.
Fertoni.
Here.
Kotchenberger. Moran.
Here.
Shuren.
Here.
Shaken.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, is there anybody from the public who wishes to address the council? We have a 5-minute limit, and please state your name and your address and proceed.
Good evening. My name is Richard Hayes. My address is 1471 Pleasant Valley Road in Manchester, Connecticut. I'm a partner and a principal in Hayes Kaufman Developers, which owns real estate at 135 and 141 Stores Road in Mansfield, Connecticut. The reason I'm here this evening, and I know many people don't read the newspaper any longer, but on Friday and Sunday, on the front page of both the Current, on both Friday and Sunday, there were articles in regard to a recent ordinance that was adopted in the town of Weathersfield. And the ordinance is in regard to panhandling. And this has been a chronic problem for us for the past half a dozen years at least, maybe longer. Most recently, it's much more of an issue. We're at a little bit of a disadvantage here because we don't have a town police department. We have resident state troopers. I've become very familiar with resident state trooper Sergeant Timmy, who was here for a while, and then Sergeant King. And a little earlier this evening, I found out that I have to now come introduce myself to Sergeant Merrill. So with that said, we have this issue. We believe it's a safety issue. It's a concern of ours from a liability standpoint, among other things, but it's primarily safety. And these guys, or these panhandlers, are very, very clever. And what they tend to do is to stand in the state right away, but when they have to retrieve something from an automobile that is being driven by one of our customers, they have to actually walk onto our property. Now, when this first started happening a half a dozen years ago, there was a state trooper here before Timmy, and I can't recall his name. But the fact of the matter was that I met with him, and then separately I met with Timmy afterwards, and we placed some signs in some very obvious spots down there so that it would give these troopers an opportunity to have a little bit more, I guess, some better opportunity to pursue these folks and see if they could, threaten them that maybe with trespass, because essentially that's what they're doing. So when they leave that middle island in that state right away and then walk into our property, they are trespassing. The problem is, I'm not so opposed to the trespass piece. It's a public piece of ground. Anybody can go there. But the problem is when they're, soliciting people in automobiles and they're stacking the traffic up and maybe standing in the way of the traffic or crossing in front of the traffic. That's all a big issue for us. So I have.
Could I ask which property you're talking about?
So we own 135 through 141 Stores Road. That's the Big Y shopping center.
Thank you.
So I should have probably started there. But it's more of a problem for us than it is for our neighbors at the Eastbrook Mall or Caddy Corner across the street, primarily because this is a grocery store and they're a soft target. And so anybody hands them a granola bar or a can of soup or a can of vegetables or anything like that, we seem to be the ones that are hindered the most by these panhandlers. So I need some help from you guys. And this is an ordinance I'd like you to take a look at, take it under consideration. Weathersfield is not unique. They've done it in South Windsor. They've done it in Enfield. They've done it in Bristol. There's a handful of other communities that have also had these issues that have pursued this as well. So happy to answer any questions. Don't want to go past my allotted 5 minutes. So if there's anything I can, if anybody has anything there, any questions, I'm trying to answer them.
We generally don't engage in dialogue at
fine.
public comment,
I
but we
understand.
will follow up on your question.
I appreciate that very much. So when will that actually transpire?
Oh, the wheels of government work.
Yeah, a little slower than I certainly do. I understand that. But
I will ask to have this put on an upcoming agenda, and we'll see where we go.
okay. Could somebody be kind enough to notice me when that does happen, please?
Oh,
Certainly
sure.
will.
Okay.
Could you email the council with your concerns?
Yes.
Thank you.
I was going to do that with, actually, one of my lawyers thought that they would do it for me, but I'm happy to do it. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
very good.
Very much.
We'll keep it in front of our minds that way.
Appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you. All right, report of the town manager. Oh, wait a minute, is there anybody else or anybody online who wishes to speak to address the council? Okay, seeing none, town manager's report, Mr.
Thank you, Mayor. Just an update that the application deadline for the Director of Planning and Development is this Friday. We've had the application period open for 3 weeks now. That'll be 4 weeks the end of this week, and we anticipate beginning to review applications at the conclusion of the application deadline. Our negotiations with UConn on a successor multi-year sewer service agreement, in my estimation, I think the estimation of our town attorney and DPW and planning and development staff that have been taking part in that, things are going pretty productively. We found that UConn has, the indications that they made at the onset about sort of high-level shifts in the nature of the agreement and the way new connections in particular would be approved, that certainly as we've gotten more into the details, the language that's being batted about seems to be triangulating in on some of the higher-level discussions that we started at. So we're actually optimistic that we may have the ability to present the council present the council with a successor agreement at the end of this month without the need to do an extension of the current expiring agreement. That remains to be seen. There's still some details to be ironed out, some areas of additional discussion, but we may actually have a multi-year sewer agreement to present to you at the end of June, and the current agreement expires June 30th. The mayor and I are going to be taking part, unless your schedule's changed, on this Wednesday, June 15th, the annual meeting of CROG. I believe that's happening in Farmington. Earlier this evening, had the pleasure, as well as the mayor and some members of the council, had the opportunity to take part in our witness stone ceremony. I'm not going to sort of rehash everything that was included in that event, but it was a great event and really, really proud moment for our community and a great showing of support for our community. And I just thought for our goals going into the event that it certainly, met all my expectations, and just look forward to that stone, which looks great, placed at the public library, continuing on in perpetuity. This past weekend, there was, I believe the official tagline was "So Long Southeast," the event at Southeast School. It was basically an open house, a drop-in for anybody with some sort of connection to the school. Could be former teachers, alumni. Obviously, I have 2 young kids that are going to Southeast now, and so they're kind of new initiates. But it was great just to see all the people with so many years, and in some cases, multiple generations of connection to Southeast. Definitely could tell it was getting emotional for some to bid farewell to a building that's been such a part of our community fabric, and obviously such a part of their particular family lives. But it's also is exciting to have a lot of conversations with people about the new elementary school and kind of pivoting into the next chapter. So kudos to everybody who put that on. I thought it was a great day. I guess I'm gonna save my notes on that for a moment later. We did officially, end of last week, launch the local business relief fund program. The council, remember, you approved funds, $370,000 from our American Rescue Plan allocation to fund a local business relief fund program. And that program has now, the application window has gone live and will remain open until July 8th. We did and want to extend a big thank you to Cynthia and our partners with the Downtown Partnership, who have been working diligently to help us get the word out and make sure that direct communication is going out to Mansfield businesses. So posting on the town and partnership websites, social media, and sent directly by email to local businesses. And we'll be doing a news release tomorrow as well, just to make sure that everybody who's interested in taking part in the program thinks they should be eligible, is aware that it's happening. This past Friday was the Celebrate Pride event. The Ellsworth family got to take part. Again, another great weather evening. I believe this is our first one, and it certainly seemed like a great way to get a new tradition started. Big thanks to Katie Bell and everybody else who helped organize that. Again, just great to see all sorts of different age people taking part and the stories being told. Certainly looked like the young kids were having a heck of a time. On the library side, want to acknowledge that Peggy McCarthy, our longtime public services librarian, is going to be retiring at the end of the month. She's been with us for 20 years. She's been an exceptional public servant, and she's initiated many popular programs. That includes the annual plant swap in the seed library, and she was instrumental in the creation of the Maple Road branch of the small satellite library at the Mansfield Senior Center. So we're excited for Peggy and her retirement, and I believe, Leslie's in the back there, I believe we feel pretty good about who we have coming on board as Peggy 2.0. Finally, a couple more notes. June is dog licensing month. We want to keep the town clerk happy, make sure that everybody gets their dog registered on time. Don't make us come after you. And finally, because I know this will segue into some remarks that the mayor and others want to share. I don't know that I could say it any differently than I did when I was on WILI a week or so ago with Wayne Norman, but want to say a couple words about our outgoing superintendent, Kelly Lyman. I've been here a year and a half, so I haven't had the privilege of working with Kelly throughout her entire 6+ years with the town, but the district's going to have some pretty big shoes to fill. And I've been very, very impressed as, a colleague of hers, as town manager, working alongside Kelly, seeing her, articulate in very compelling ways a vision for the district, obviously working hand in glove with her on the new elementary school construction project. In part, I guess, as much as a parent, as a town manager, just how good you feel, knowing when your kids go to school that you have a leader of the district like that. And I know that she would be quick to say that the district's in very capable hands. Peter Dart, the incoming superintendent, I'm sure will hit the ground running, and he's obviously a known quantity, and he knows our school district, having been the principal at Goodwin. But again, big shoes to fill, and it's been a pleasure, Kelly, working with you. Wish you the very best in the next chapter, and hope you won't be a stranger. So that concludes my report.
The next item on the agenda is reports and comments of council members, and I'm going to go stand over there to make mine.
I think we're allowed to ask the town manager questions first.
I'm sorry, I was focusing on what I had to do next. Go ahead, Mr. Coleman.
Mr. Ellsworth, you're on the search committee for the search for the new president of the university. Congratulations on that. Being on a search committee, is there a way for you to feel out how Mansfield can be represented in the search and the quality of a president?
So I think I understand where you're going with this. The initial stages, the executive search firm, organized during I think it was the month of April and maybe a little bit into May, a large number of stakeholder listening sessions. And so at least at that point, because they had their own sort of public engagement process, if you will, didn't necessarily feel it was, I want to see how that played out, I guess, and give them the benefit of the doubt and see what kind of public feedback they got. They're in the process of compiling and have not yet quite gotten around to reporting on all that feedback. But I did make a couple comments at the last meeting that my own observation was that while, again, I think the sort of intent was right, the heart was in the right place, that I think the stakeholder engagement could have been a little heavier, a little healthier on the sort of non-UConn side. And they seem to be receptive to that. And so we haven't necessarily figured out exactly what additional mechanisms for stakeholder engagement might look like from the true general public, as it were. But just want to let you know they did signal some receptivity to that.
Thank you. Downtown Partnership, Economic Development and Marketing. You didn't touch base on this, but lately I've been seeing a lot of comments on Mansfield Connection on Facebook in regards to people not knowing the events that are going on in the square and other things that are happening. I think we could probably do a better job at getting that out there. Do you have any suggestions?
I don't know that I have any suggestions other than I know that we have a whole team that talks constantly about how to get out the word and communicate the events that are going on. I think we've been approaching it in a pretty multifaceted way, but I can certainly take that feedback back to that team and let them know that there's some perspective out there that we could be doing better and see what their thoughts are. And if you have specific suggestions, of course, we would be open to those.
Thank you. There was a piece on emergency preparedness. I don't know if it's in this copy here or not.
Are we talking about?
I think it was, I read it online. We were assessing, dams and whatnot. Yeah. Have they identified any hazards like that in Mansfield, or is this preliminary right now?
I have not received a detailed debrief from our emergency management director, so I'd be happy to, follow up with him and get a little bit more information, but I don't have any more information to share at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Osberger.
Yeah, Ryan, just a brief thing. I don't know how appropriate it would be square, but when I had my restaurant right here, when the old plaza was there, we had a marquee. So either maybe a marquee in the square somewhere or part of the monthly flyer that goes out ahead of time to inform the public about what the
Thanks.
Anybody else? All right, my turn. It's been a very busy couple of weeks. We raised the pride flag. We had the Memorial Day Parade, which was a great success. We had the Tour de Mansfield, which 75 people rode bikes for 40 or 20 miles around town. All wonderful weather for that day, also a great success. We had the going away party for Linda Painter, which was very nice, although I really wish you weren't going, but that's the way professional development happens, and we wish her the very best. And then there was the retirement party for our school superintendent. And it's very difficult to talk about what Kelly Lyman brought to Mansfield because from an educational point of view, I will leave that to the educators, but what she brought for the town is equally significant. When she came, we were undergoing a real crisis. Mansfield has always prided itself on the quality of its government employees and on the quality of its education. And both of those factors were somewhat at risk at the time. We knew that we needed to build a new school or schools. We didn't quite know how it was going to work out. But we knew that something needed to be done, not just for education, but also to burnish the image of the town of Mansfield in the public eye. Kelly came and initiated a process which deeply engaged the members of our community and also the educational leadership in our community. She made sure that everybody who had an opportunity to have an opinion had one and was heard, and also set new standards and goals for the quality of education that we have. And ultimately, she led us into developing the plans for the first net neutral public school in the state of Connecticut, which won't open before Labor Day as we had all hoped, but will be open before this generation of kids grows up. Definitely before this generation grows up. In any case, Kelly, would you come forward? The council would really like to express some of its gratitude for your leadership And this is a traditional going away gift. Yes, of course, it's the Mansfield. What else would it be?
Stoneware, yeah.
Yes.
I love school.
You
I
wanna
hope
say
that
a
gift
few
is under
words?
$10.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. And I'm very honored to be here this evening. It's been a long goodbye. It's been like 2 weeks now. People have been saying goodbye. And I still have 2 weeks to work. But I very much appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule for this opportunity. And I have made remarks multiple times about the work that's been done here in my tenure, with thanks to all of the other people who made that work possible. And I've said repeatedly that it begins with, in my case, a strong board, but in my case, a town council that also knows what its role is, how to operate and support what's happening in the city, and has trust in its administrators. I have to say, this is just a wonderful. When I interviewed for the job, I knew fit. This was a town that really, I thought, fit what I was looking for, what I was hoping to do as than that, and more. What we have accomplished, I think, really striking. We have an amazing, fabulous team. Really been honored to be part of this. I just have one request, and that is that the building is done. So-
Send the resident state trooper to get you
Okay,
if necessary.
Thank you, and thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. Very kind of you.
Thank
Thanks.
you. This afternoon, we did the witness stone honoring the memory of Titus, who was an enslaved person in Mansfield in the early mid-1700s. There was a representative from the Last Green Valley organization. Some of you may have their materials, so I guess I'm the only one who got the books. But we were told that ours was the best celebration she had been to. And that's really thanks to the Mansfield Middle School. Certainly Kelly's leadership contributed to that. We heard kids reading their own poetry and stories. The middle school chorus sang and did a lovely job. And there was really quite a crowd in front of the library. So you should stop by and see the stone, see some of the materials that the kids put together that's inside the library. So with that, I will go back to my seat. Does anybody else have comments? Mr. Shaken.
Thanks. Just real quick, I want to thank, again, echo your words of thanks for the witness stone ceremony. We were joined by Councilor Berthelot and me, and Councilor Coleman were there. It was really excellent, and Representative Pat Wilson Phineas, who used to represent the state district next to ours in Willington, Ashford, and Tolland, gave a really, really wonderful speech talking about how the Witness Stone Project had contacted her in the middle of her first run for office to tell her that they had identified her ancestors from Guilford as one of their first projects. It was really powerful. And I also, in addition to the Memorial Day Parade, which was excellent as usual, attended the So Long Southeast event that Ryan mentioned in his report this past weekend. It was really cool. I didn't expect to see so many alumni. I just sort of figured it would be an event with the school community, which is why I was there. But there were people there who were my age, who went to school when I was a kid with me, and they had gone to Southeast, and there were people there who went Southeast a lot longer ago than that, who were there just to sort of check the school out. So I know we're not quite saying goodbye so long to Goodwin and Vinton yet. I know Southeast, at least for kids my age, has a reputation for having a little bit more of a cohesive community. But I really hope we can put these events on at those other two schools when it's time to say so long to them as well, because it was really cool just to see people come and check the school out who hadn't been there for 30 years or more. And I think there were a lot of former staff and teachers there as well who have retired long since and
were there to check out their old classrooms and all that. It was really cool, and so something we should do in the other places.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a comment of a council member. It is not business. I'd like to speak a little bit about recognition. Why do we recognize people? We don't do it to help someone get a raise or for political gain. We recognize people because we believe in them. When we believe in the people in our community, the spirit of others lifts them up and helps them achieve great things. We've had many recent events where I believe we have failed to recognize people due to our failure in technology here in the town of Mansfield. The Memorial Day ceremony at the new cemetery in Mansfield Center, to my knowledge, was not recorded or shared. We failed our veterans, our elected officials who read the governor's proclamation on Memorial Day. We failed the Girl Scout, who bravely read us a poem. We failed Dr. Carlita Cotton, who had worked so hard on a thoughtful address. The town manager also spoke, but I believe he is a victim of his own circumstance. Then there was the raising of the pride flag at the town hall. We again failed to recognize people. We didn't have a microphone that worked to record the speakers representing the LGBTIA community. Our mayor read the council proclamation on June Pride Month. From what little I could hear, her reading came from her heart. It was not just some elected official reciting words from a page. She felt it. We may have raised the pride flag that day, but we lowered the bar on recognizing people in our community. Then there was the passing of the Special Olympics torch by our law enforcement officials. We failed to recognize them for the over 3-mile run to Hops 44. The first notification I got on this event was 30 minutes prior to the event starting, and attendance was low. While we'll never agree on everything, we can have a healthy debate for common consensus because we believe in each other. If we believe in each other, all things are possible in our community. Mansfield needs to do a better job of promoting our events that our citizens are so much part of. We also need to do a better job of recording and sharing the historical record because we believe in each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Anybody else have a comment? All right, the next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. The consent agenda has 4 items on it. The approval of minutes of May 23rd, the appointment of an auditor, proposed capital program adjustments, proposed capital improvement program adjustments for fiscal 21-22, and the transfer of uncollected taxes to property tax suspense book. All of these last 3 items have been approved by the Finance Committee at their meeting earlier this evening, and there are motions from that committee to approve them. Do I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda? Mr. Bruder moves. Is there a second?
I would like to make a motion to pull items B, C, and D out into the agenda for discussion.
All right, there's been a request to remove those. That leaves the approval of the minutes on the consent agenda. Is there a second on the consent? Mr. Shuren seconds. Does anybody have any comments on the minutes of May 23rd? Well, it's not the consent agenda, but all that's left on it is the minutes. All right. All those in favor, raise your hand. Thank you. These next 3 items came to us from the Finance Committee, so I am going to suggest that we move them to the reports of council committees. All right, the next item on our agenda is, do I need a motion to do that? Okay. Next item on our agenda is the change in name and charge of the Personnel Committee. Mr. Shuren?
This was suggested to us a few months ago, and I will say that when I heard that suggestion, it resounded because when I was appointed to the Personnel Committee and I asked, what does that committee do? Then Mayor Shapiro said, well, this and that, and you'll find out. I think it was useful, the idea, to lay out the charge to the Personnel Committee. I understand, I should say, there was no effort on our part to take up tasks that were not previously done by the Personnel Committee, but I could understand some concerns that Mr. Kotchenberger has. So I'm going to make the motion that we have this charge to the Personnel Committee approved, and then leave it up to the council to amend or debate or vote for it or not approve it.
Is this a recommendation from the Personnel Committee?
It is a recommendation from the Personnel Committee. It was approved by the Personnel
All
Committee.
right. There isn't a motion in the agenda?
There is not. So where is the motion? Okay, page 27.
Ah, okay. I just flew right by it.
So
Okay.
I would move effective June 13, 2022, to endorse the updated charge for the Personnel Committee and change the committee name to the Personnel and Procedures Committee.
Would you like to speak to your motion?
Only in addition to what I said, we were dealing with matters other than pure personnel in terms of procedures, and so we decided to recommend that change in the name.
All right. And would you tell me where the actual language of the proposal is?
Pages 29 and 30.
Where does the charge begin? Because that is
Yeah.
a memo.
Yeah.
So does it begin with with the paragraph, the Personnel Committee to be redesignated the personal? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so that's the motion. Further discussion, Mr. Shaken.
Thanks. I just have a question to Counselor Shuren. It's a sort of hypothetical question, which is, I don't think the other, maybe I'm incorrect about this, but I don't think the Finance Committee or the Committee on Committees has a formal charge. They're standing committees, as is this committee. And, you know, their charges taken from their past and from their name. But there's nothing that would stop any of those committees from deciding they wanted to deal with something else that was, you know, roughly related to finance. So like, for example, on the Finance Committee under Peter's leadership, and perhaps in the past, we've spent some time thinking about the town's insurance policies, which isn't exactly directly a finance-related thing. If you were to write our charge, it would be to do what we're going to do later that Councilor Coleman pulled off of the consent agenda, move money around recommend to move money around as the year goes on through the town's budget, and maybe not much else. So I guess my question is, as a standing committee, different from the ad hoc committees that we create, what would stop a future personnel chair from deciding to write an agenda that was different than this charge or included something that wasn't included in this charge? And what would stop the committee of a future council from deciding that they didn't like this charge and wanted to do something different, wanted to not do something on this list, for example? I mean, what's we're setting a policy for ourselves that we have the ability to control as it goes forward.
Couple of points. One, the committee has no final authority on anything. May recommend to the council, as the other committees will. Secondly, there's nothing that keeps the Personnel Committee from offering a proposal, as the other committees can offer, but the council could determine in its wisdom that it's not appropriate to come from the Personnel. Could reject it for that reason.
Mr. Katzenberger.
Thank you. So I recognize, I think there's, certainly some merit to this, but I would vote against it at least as phrased, for a couple reasons. And to preface this, none of them have anything to do with the makeup of the Personnel Committee. I have tremendous confidence in the integrity and skill of the Personnel Committee now and as it is constituted before. However, this is, I think, a substantial increase in direct responsibility. And while, yes, of course, it's an advisory committee, all the committees are advisory in a sense, and there's nothing bad about this, it's one of the purposes of a committee, is that there's significant power in a committee. They vet the ideas that go forward typically. They provide informal advice to whatever town staff that they're working with. They help guide the discussion and help decide what gets on the council agenda. All of that is fine and appropriate, but it isn't, it also is a screening process that has significant power. And that's why anyone who really cares about a particular issue will try to be on an ad hoc committee, even though it is simply making recommendations, perhaps specific ones. So I think here this is too much power, and there's too much power for one council, one committee in itself, even given the fact that the council itself can review. I have some specific suggestions, to which we can just talk about it if that's the desire of the council, to reduce some of this. But I also think, and I'm happy to talk about that, as I said, but I also think that this makes sense, and this gets a little to Ben's point, but perhaps a different take on it, that maybe all three committees should have charges, should have focus, spend not a lot of time, but some time considering for itself what its powers should be or what its roles should be. Because it doesn't make sense to do one of these in a vacuum. Some of these, such as review and advise their collective bargaining agreements or on employee insurance and other benefits, that may be perfectly appropriate for the Finance Committee to do or for the Personnel Committee to do. The idea, again, or my thought, is that we should, if we're going to, the idea of having specific charges makes sense, but then we should do it for all three, rather than do one, which in essentially is a vacuum. And the other, so that's, I would recommend, that would be my first recommendation. I can make a motion if that's what, but I don't think it would be a motion to amend this. It would be a motion to have each of the three standing committees well, personnel has already done it, but to work and then to coordinate to more precisely define their roles if we need to. But the second is not to put all this responsibility within any one committee. And again, I'll just reiterate at the end that this is not any lack of confidence in the Personnel Committee, certainly not my desire to increase necessarily the power role of finance or any other. It's simply, I think, better government for better use of the town council as a whole. We're not deluged with requests for information or work that many of these issues can't come to us directly. And when we think they shouldn't be, they can either then be directed to one of the three committees, or an ad hoc committee can be taken up. But I don't like the idea of providing so much initial review process in any one committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Katzenberger. Mr. Shuren?
Yeah, let me just say that in drafting this, what I did was look at the minutes of prior Personnel Committees meetings over the past few years. Everything in here was taken from that process. I have no objection to what Councilman Katzenberger is saying in terms of perhaps narrowing the scope or whatever. And indeed, if there's concern about that, we put it off once before. As I said, this is not time sensitive, and I'm willing to recraft this. But if I would like to kind of move it along in a sense so that so I or future members of the council have a clear sense of what this committee is about. And, finance has a clear meaning, committees have a clear meaning, personnel has kind of a broader meaning and is not as clear. So I would like to do something along this line. How we should proceed now, and indeed, as I see this, we had not perhaps crafted it as a full resolution as we should have. I'm willing to defer it to another meeting, but I would like to kind of move it or a process of all committees along, and at least move this one along, so that the Personnel Committee, whose charter is somewhat murkier, has something more clear.
Mr. Shern, you've now spoken twice to the motion. So is there, Mr. Osberger?
Yes, and I have to agree with Councilor Kotzenberger's assessment of everything. I think that within this, and with the Procedures Committee, that could also be just relegated to an ad hoc committee to go over procedural things, and I completely agree with him that it does add to their charge too much and perhaps gives them too much power. But of course, I also agree with Mr. Shern as well that there should be some definition and direction to what their charge should be. But certainly the Procedures Committee could delegate it to ad hoc committee.
Mr. Shahan?
Thanks. So my question sort of got at a concern that I have about charges in general. And it's a similar concern to that I've had and voiced when we've done things like set policies for how the council should be expending certain funds, the employee healthcare fund being the most recent one that I can remember. There's lots of great stuff in that policy and good ideas from the council that set that policy, but there's nothing that would stop all of us from getting thrown out of office by 9 other people who would then be going against the policy of the council if they decided to do something different. And so there's some interesting questions of what legislative authority the council has on its own to do things different from tradition or from this particular council's idea of good policy. When we do things like set, here's what we think this particular group of people should do, or this fund should do, or whatever. I served on on this issue specifically, putting my concerns aside for a second. I served on this committee my first term on the council, and I don't see anything on this list that is an inaccurate representation of the duties of the committee as it's been performed since at least 2015. The only deviation that I think I could come up with is that it is my general recollection that, with the exception of the things that fall under town management, which are the things that I would call personnel broadly, the 2 other things, recruitment of the professional assistants, the town attorney specifically, and the procedure review, are both things that have fallen to the personnel committee in the past, but have done so at the specific request of the council. It's not something that the personnel committee automatically did because it was part of their charge. It's something that at the beginning of the term, having no other body really put together for these purposes, the council has asked the personnel committee, could you take a look at our rules of procedures and see if there's any changes you'd like to make? And similarly, could you take a look at the town attorney's contract and see if you would like to recommend any changes? So to me, the distinction is the council can ask any committee to look at anything, and has in the past, over at least the last 4 terms, asked the personnel committee, could you take a look at this? But that those things haven't fallen on the personnel committee to do without specific council authority in each particular time. And so we could grant that authority in perpetuity through passing this charge, or we could narrow the charge to be personnel, and then put a bullet that says, and other duties as assigned, and have the council assign things, just like they can ask the finance committee to look at something, or committee on committees to look at something. So I'm okay to vote for this as it sits now. I don't think it gives the committee more power than what it's doing right now, but I do understand, I think, what Councilor Kotzenberger is saying, and I think that's the distinction I would draw. And it may be worthwhile to go back with that understanding and see if there's adjustments that the committee might want to make to sort of talk about personnel things, and then you could, the charge could say something like, in the past, the council's referred these issues to the personnel committee and may do so in the future. But that at least gives the council the ability to say, the rules of procedure haven't been working this term. Instead of just asking the personnel committee to do a sort of cursory look and make some minor changes, we'd like to convene an ad hoc rules of procedure committee and rewrite them. Because 10 things aren't working, it's going to be a big problem. The control of the council could shift, and there could be a decision to change the rule about public comment, move it to the end of the meeting. Like, all sorts of things that are big pieces of the rules could happen. The council could ask an ad hoc committee to do. So that's my thought of how a resolution might be reached that could satisfy your desire to have the things in writing and other councilors' desire to have those assignments maybe go through the council.
Are you proposing an amendment to the existing proposal?
No, I would rather propose to do what Councilor Shuren suggested, which is using this discussion to go back and put something together as a committee to come back with the feedback from the council. I don't want to amend it on the floor if I can help it.
All right. The motion to do that, I believe, would be a motion to return it to the committee for further work. If somebody wanted to do that. Mr. Katzenberger?
I mean, I don't mind making that motion, but I wonder at least if we could discuss, or maybe no one else supports it or not a sufficient number, that that the other two committees, Finance and Committee on Committees, do a similar work. I mean, if we're going to assign, try to divvy up or assign specific tasks, it needs to be done all at once, I think. It just makes much more sense. It's more coherent to have all three committees looking at this. So that would be, I can make that as, I don't think that's a friendly amendment. I think that's a different motion, but I can do it any way people want. Because I agree, I understand the desire to, let's get, stuff done on paper. And I don't think this should, take months or anything to do it. I think it'd be reasonable, whether it's by the next council meeting or at least, within a month for the other two committees to get back, although Terry is, here today. I do think, another only other thing I was going to say, I take it, I understand that the fact that many, looking through, these are things that the town, the Personnel Committee has done, but some of it, as worded, is just very broad, such as proposals for organization of town administration. That could be a major revamp. That's a major restructuring. That's something that should be decided by the council or maybe ad hoc. So there's a few things like that, and I have some written suggestions, which I agree that now's not the time to to discuss them. But my suggestion is that all three committees consider this.
All right, we have a motion in front of us. I haven't heard a motion to amend or to recommit to committee. So I believe that the motion before us is the motion that Mr. Shuren proposed, and unless somebody has additional conversation, it might be time to vote. Mr. Shaken.
I'll make the motion to send it to recommit this item to the Personnel Committee.
Is there a second to Mr. Shaken's motion? Mr. Osberger seconds. Discussion about Mr. Shaken's motion to send this back to committee?
Just if there's a potential friendly amendment, which is to also direct personnel, finance and committee on committees to do a similar draft.
I think they're different things. I think we're dealing with the motion on the table.
Yes, let's just do the motion on the table.
Sure.
All right, the motion is to recommit. All those in favor of the motion, of the amendment Mr. Shaken has proposed, please raise your hand. All right, it's unanimous. We'll send it back to committee. Just one side comment is that if that committee is in charge of our rules and procedures, a charge to committees would be part of the council's rules and procedures. And if other council members want to work on charges for other committees, maybe that's the place to do it. Mr. Shaken.
But well, I agree, actually. And so why don't I make Peter's motion to ask the other two committees to do this? And I'll just say, our rules are extraordinarily light on committees. All it says is there will be these committees. And I remember a few years ago, there was this open question when Betty was on the council of who could cancel a committee meeting. And so when people wouldn't show up, who could actually cancel the meeting? How could you not have a meeting? It wasn't spelled out. So we had to add language that said the chair gets to set the agenda and cancel the meeting. So I think it makes some sense. And I agree with the mayor that in time it might make some sense to flesh that part of our rules out a little bit. But for now, why don't I move that the council direct the Finance and Committee on Committees to develop similar charges in due course.
Is there a second to Mr. Shaken's motion? Mr. Coleman seconds. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Passed unanimously. All right. I would like to call your attention to the time. We're pushing 8, so it would be nice to make progress on this agenda. Next item on our agenda is new business, the Mansfield Digital Inclusion Initiative. Mr. Aylesworth and Mr. Russell and Ms. McDonald.
Thank you, Mayor. While Jamie and Leslie make their way up to the table, I'll just remind the council that the Mansfield Digital Inclusion Initiative is one of several recommendations, proposals that was presented to the council for funding through the American Rescue Plan. This falls in the category of which there were generally 3 categories, you'll recall, where the council either fully approved a project, as in good to go tomorrow, or conditionally approved a project pending an implementation plan, or set aside for additional conversation. So this was, the concept was approved by you all, but this was a conditional approval pending an implementation plan, and basically that's what we're here to kind of talk through this evening. So with that, I'll turn it over to Leslie or Jamie, or whoever wants to talk first.
Welcome.
Oh, sorry. I had very specific instructions that made me interested. Jamie, I'm going to leave. I'm not going to do a full slideshow because in the past, the mayors like to be able to see the list of participants. So we'll do it from this view, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the council for giving us an opportunity to come tonight. Both Leslie and I are pleased to join you. Just introduce myself firstly, and then Leslie can introduce herself. Jamie Russell, IT Director for the town and schools. As the town manager referenced, we're here to present on the Mansfield Digital Inclusion Initiative. We're going to provide a brief overview that kind of echoes what you have in your packet. Wanted to draw your attention to some of the highlights from the handout in the packet, and then open it up if there are any questions or inquiries. So to start us off, we've put up a definition of digital inclusion. This idea of digital inclusion has gotten a lot of traction in recent years. Part of that is due to COVID. COVID certainly put an exclamation mark on the importance of digital access, but the reality is this is a trend that's been happening for a long time now. One of the major things that's happening is the recognition that as a community, not only Mansfield, but nationwide, we need to take steps to broaden access to digital resources, specifically by overcoming barriers to individuals' access. That we have members of our community, not only here again in Mansfield, but across the country, that face barriers that are excluding them.
Hey, I'm Leslie McDonough, the library director, if y'all don't know me. Digital access impacts full participation in society. We have daily proof of that at the library. Every day we help more than one person fill out a form, look up information, apply for a grant, try to pay a bill. Scarily enough, they also ask us if we can save their passwords for them. So we find that there's a great need to assist the public in actually using the internet, and they come to the library because we have both the internet, all three, the internet, the devices, and the expertise to help them to effectively.
As you can see on this slide, I want to draw attention to the fact that there's recognition that digital access is not merely about do you have access to social media, but it has become an integral part of our society, and someone who is cut off really faces tremendous barriers. All of the research on digital inclusion points to that there are 3 components, and you can't effectively overcome those barriers by only addressing 1 or 2 of these components. You really have to work on all 3. Specifically, they include broadband access refers to connectivity, and this is not only a connection to online access, but in today's world, a sufficiently robust connection. that if you have a slow dial-up connection, that is not going to overcome barriers for you. The second piece is device access. This can be stationary or mobile. It can be used by an individual or by a group. And this is not merely possessing a device, but having a reliable device as well that you can depend on. And then the third component, which in many ways, frankly, is the most important one and is the most difficult one to overcome, is what is referred to as digital literacy. Digital literacy is about overcoming those barriers to access by knowing how to successfully use resources. And this is very individualized. This is not a one-size-fits-all. Each individual faces different barriers and different challenges, and also it's a moving target. It's not one of those things that you suddenly you're a digitally literate and you check that box and you move on. It's something that's always evolving, and there's always new skills, and all of us are kind of on a continuum there, and it's about bringing everyone along.
Okay, when Jamie and I first talked about this grant, we did a fair amount of research, and we used the work of several national and statewide organizations. That's just a list up there of some of the groups that we've used as resources. I personally am a member of the Connecticut State Library's Library Partners for Digital Equity Initiative, and have gotten a lot of good information out of that. So this isn't something that we just said, hey, let's put on a show. It was more, we thought about it and did some research and feel that we have a proposal that reflects the best and broadest of research on digital literacy.
One of the things that Leslie and I have appreciated a great deal is the opportunity to talk to our colleagues. As Leslie alluded, both of us have had that opportunity, and literally talking to other communities that have already begun to tackle this and talk about some of the lessons learned, what was successful and what were challenges that they had to adjust. In doing that, we took a look at both the things that we see day to day, our staff sees day to day, and the things we hear from other departments as we talk to them, to look at what are the barriers to access in Mansfield, and how can we approach that in a flexible way that recognizes that different people have different barriers. So specifically, you see some items listed up here that are included in our proposal. As you may have seen in the packet goes into some greater detail, but just to briefly speak to these. First category of broadband access, we've identified a need for public spaces, more public spaces, where individuals can either bring their own device or we can provide a device to have either wireless or wired access. Sometimes that's the individuals coming to the space, but in the second bullet point there, it's about bringing the space to the individual, whether that's mobile hotspots that we could loan out, or whether it's a broadband literacy van where we literally bring broadband access to a neighborhood, a gathering area, an event. The second category is device access, and that takes a number of forms. We are increasingly seeing not only these council meetings, for example, other public meetings, but even events and so forth, hybrid participation, giving individuals the opportunity to participate in something that maybe isn't even taking place in Mansfield, or giving them the opportunity to experience hybrid participation in a shared environment so they're more comfortable doing it at home. Recognizing that we need to be able to provide device access. That could be shared access in a space, whether that's a mobile device like a tablet, a laptop, and so forth, whether that's a stationary item like a terminal or kiosk, whether that's recognizing that when they bring their device, having a charging station. We've looked at charging stations that can be both inside and outside that are really easy to use, that can be used on demand, whether that demand is because you're at an event, or frankly, whether that demand is because there's a storm and there's widespread power outage. And finally, in device access, recognizing that we should leverage some of the software that's out there to make things easier to use from devices, whether that's an interface for a kiosk, whether that's tying into the CIP project that you folks approved for the website. Make sure that we're doing things in a way that if you have the device, you have connectivity, it's also easy to get to it on a small screen, on a mobile device, on someone with limited familiarity. And then the final component is a digital access specialist, where we consistently heard and saw time and time again, both not only in our work, but in the individuals we talk to, this is not something that's easy to overcome. that certainly there are times where a next door neighbor, a family member can kind of sit with someone and help. But a lot of the barriers we're talking about here are systemic and deep and requires an individual who's trained, knows how to do it, become an expert on how you make people aware of some of the programs that are out there for free or reduced cost access, how you help government services to better present things online, how you train individuals about how to build up their own capacity. So not only do they maybe know how to fill out that job application, but how they'll be able to fill out future ones as well. And so that person would be, professional, trained individual who knows what they're doing during the duration of the program, which we anticipate would be a 2-year program. Now, with that being said, we did want to open it up if there were any questions about anything either we presented tonight or that was provided in the packet.
Mr. Shaken, followed by Mr. Bruder, followed by Mr. Shuren, followed by Mr. Kotchenberger.
Thanks. Thanks for this proposal and for the really detailed financial breakdown. My question is really about the digital access specialist and their charge, it seems to me, is focused primarily on, or at least partially on, helping people navigate the town's website and various systems on that website. And so I guess my question is, how much is that position, how much of that could we invest in making those systems work better rather than in hiring someone to teach people how to use systems that are really hard to use? The two that I interact with that I find incredibly maddening are paying my trash bill, which I do with a credit card, which requires me to visit an entirely different website because our tax service doesn't let you pay with a credit card, but the town accepts them. But that's not linked anywhere. I have to go back to the start email that Ashley sent me in 2015 when I bought my house that has a link to it. And then literally anything having to do with Parks and Rec. The Parks and Rec system that they use to sign up for things is impossible for me to figure out, and I consider myself to be fairly digitally literate, just like a step short of knowing how to make computers. So my question is, do we need to hire someone to teach people how to use these really hard to use systems, or would it make more sense to take ARPA dollars meant to do a better job with the town's digital access for residents and actually like overhaul and revamp those systems?
I agree. Some of the town systems are complex, and we spend time helping people navigate them fairly often. But that's not the only purpose for this specialist. And most of the people that we help do not know how to go beyond Facebook and email. They don't know about how to secure their accounts. They don't know. I had someone walk in with their Roku stick and say, I want to stop a service. I don't know how to do it. Can you look at my Roku stick? It's things that are that basic. I mean, what you're talking about is a fairly high level of access. We are really dealing with more basic than that, and people who do not have smartphones or have smartphones and don't know how to use them, or who do not have the internet at home. So when we talk about helping out with the town's website, we're thinking more about how can, and I don't know much about the redesign piece. I have not been paying attention to that. But it's more about helping departments think more like, I hate to say it, a librarian. How is this going to make this easy for the public to access? Because that's a lot of what we, so really that was a thought process behind what we were thinking.
Yeah, I would echo Leslie's comments. I think that's correct, that the website would be an example, but it's not the bulk of it. But even in terms of the website, correct. I don't think we want this individual teaching people cumbersome systems. If there's an element to which they're involved in sort of working with departments on, like, I like that. Thinking like a librarian. I'm going to steal that. I like that. The goal is not to create something where it requires a packet to use it successfully. The goal is to make it intuitive, so.
Thanks, that's helpful.
And just, I guess, briefly to piggyback on that, there is money, as I'm sure the deputy mayor remembers, in our capital improvement plan for website upgrades, and Jamie, you and I did talk about how this would interface to a degree with that, so maybe in 30 words or less, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. So as the town manager referenced, there's a natural interface here, is that this focus on digital literacy does get at how do you make things easy to access. Again, the thinking like a librarian, I like that. How to make things easy to access. So in the design of the website, this individual would certainly be active in that, but this initiative in general would be active in it, and that it needs to be, again, something where you don't need a packet to know how to use it. It needs to be intuitive. And so that certainly is one of the focuses of the redesign. This individual wouldn't be teaching people how to use the old website or helping them overcome things that are complicated on the website. It'd be more of a, how do we make sure it's intuitive, it's easy, and how are they part of that?
Mr. Bruder?
Thank you. I happened to be watching CTN, and weren't you, Ryan, on a board or some kind of meeting where funding for this kind of stuff was being discussed?
Yes, the
And representing this very well, thank you.
yes, the Connecticut Commission on Education Technology, CET, and I've had some follow-up email conversation with Doug Casey, the executive director, about, in fact, I shared this text, the Digital Inclusion Initiative, because it was very timely with him. And there's definitely, it sounds like there's some monies available, some additional competitive grant funding that this would probably be a good fit for. And I don't have all his breakout in front of me, but I know one of the hangups would be, we really want to get a move on this, basically as soon as possible.
Right.
And I think, if memory serves correct, and Jamie, you might recall better because I know I shared the information with you, if memory serves correct, we were thinking, or I think it was something like 18 months from now before maybe the money, that if we were able to get it, that we could start to basically initiate the initiative. So while it would be a good fit, and there's always intrigue, and it's attractive to think about what we could save some ARPA dollars for other things, because we think this, which we're proposing to use ARPA dollars for, could be funded with something else. I do think there's the risk, well, one, we might not get the funding, but two, even if we do, it's the delay in waiting, so.
I think Leslie and I have noticed the same in the organizations we've been attending, the meetings we've been going to, folks have been talking about it's more down the road. So it's still a ways off. The earliest we've heard is maybe 6 months, if not longer. And the other piece we've gathered is that if you can't point to some success already, you're not going to be as competitive. Some of the communities we've been talking to already have begun this process and are 6 to 12 months into it. They're going to be more likely to be competitive. And then the last piece, which personally the two of us have tried to be vocal against, but we think is going to be a barrier, a lot of the dollars really only focus on the bandwidth side of things, the connectivity, and they miss the other two components. So not that we wouldn't leverage those, but unfortunately, sometimes don't really address the whole thing. So.
Yeah,
Yeah, and just, too, with these grants, we're talking 18 months out, but they're also, they have levels of precedence, and they're going to go for communities that have no access first, then little access. Mansfield, being in a fairly good condition, actually, in terms of broadband, would be lower down on the totem pole and would have less access, as be lower priority for dollars.
Yeah. I think that, even if we couldn't still, I don't know how much one of these applications takes. Still in favor of it in this capacity, just exactly what you were saying. And then maybe using the applications in increments to kind of continue beyond the 2 years.
And that's exactly what we discussed. So this initiative, while, I think it's something we're very proud of, and I'm proud of the effort that staff has put into conceiving this. No one's representing this as if we did this, somehow this solves all our digital equity, digital inclusion issues. I think it really is kind of a tip of the iceberg. It's a good start. And so, to your point, I think, we would still pursue these other grant dollars, but hopefully we could leverage, build some momentum with our initial success using rescue plan funds.
Mr. Shuren?
In terms of digital literacy, beyond interaction with the town, if you have, for example, a senior citizen who wants to know how to access social media. Is there a role for, say, the senior center in that, or community center, or is there a role for other entities in the town to provide classes and other services of that nature?
I know the senior center has provided classes from volunteers in the past, and the library has provided classes at the senior center in the past. I think we would partner with them to try to leverage the person that we would be hiring, because there is a fair amount of need out there. But I also want to emphasize that it's really not a skill that many people have, and I wouldn't want to depend on volunteers for the bulk of the work.
Mr. Katzenberger, followed by Mr. Osberger, and followed by Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work on this. This is very thoughtful, and I certainly support it. My major question, I guess, and maybe it's, I guess it's a separate project, is when I think of this first, and you mentioned it briefly, Jamie, is first understanding where physically is broadband access simply not available today. I mean, it doesn't matter what it costs, it's just not there. And I don't know if we're talking 2% of the town, 30% of the town, but having some sense of that. And then the second is, I think the most fundamental need is to make sure, is to then address, first of all, the limitations on where it's available. And then secondly, to address the presumably both educational and financial limitations. But I don't think there's, especially for education, which is, when thinking of COVID, probably, I guess my chief thought or concern, is that there's no substitute for having broadband access in the home. You can't go to the library or any one spot every day for class for a week or two. And while hopefully we will not be in that situation again, certainly the expansion of, as you've all noted, of hybrid and online has increased. So I think that's a major factor in my mind, not to slow this down, but in some ways, I think that's, when I think of digital access, I guess I think of that initial point, which is it literally available? And just two, what are the financial and educational, but financial constraints so we can get people online? And I think that's particularly important to do at by residents, particularly for families that have children in school.
Peter, let's get an answer. Are there areas in town where it is simply unavailable?
Yeah, we'll speak to that. So in Mansfield specifically, the barrier primarily is financial. Where the individual, where this program can help is making people aware of programs that are out there where you can get it at a reduced cost, or you can qualify for reimbursement. The federal government has a very robust program, for example. So there are very rare spots in town where you might not, but generally every spot in town does have access to bandwidth if you can afford it, or you know how to do the low cost. Where we saw it, the schools are a good example. The state of Connecticut had a program for that, so we literally were able to blanket with families during COVID. There were very few families that were in a spot where there was not broadband, and generally that got overcome. The issue was the financial piece was the barrier, and this program would help to inform people on that. Mansfield was just lucky that generally almost every household has at least one provider that can provide broadband access.
I mean, land or residents that just don't have access. I mean, I don't mean because of financial, it's just not yet available. Is it really small?
It should be generally financial, because almost every address in town, if you have the financial means, you can get it.
Okay.
Now, you may not either have the financial means, or maybe you don't know how to sign up. That could be another barrier, but it's almost exclusively that you can't. Now, there are some exceptions that we've run into. There are some parts where homes are just, because of their distance off the road or from entry points, but it's not many.
Thank you.
There were a few apartment complexes also that didn't have access, but most of those got addressed during COVID. So, yeah. And again, if you have money or you know how to sign up, sometimes it's the barrier. But they literally didn't have a broadband provider. They just had lower level speeds.
I would assume that if people have cable, they have access to internet.
Yep, that is generally the case. That's a fair assumption. There are, again, some cases where there's an asterisk to that, but that's 99.9% true.
Right. Mr. Osberger, followed by Mr. Coleman.
Yes, I like Ron's suggestion that, we do have some sort of a class, with the Senior Center for Seniors. Although if someone is really having a problem like that where they can't figure out their Roku, perhaps they need to be referred to social services, perhaps. Anecdotally, most 9-year-olds know how to do all of this, and perhaps we can have some sort of a mentoring program, and then we offer up a campership for the child that can help or something. And younger children are, in many cases, more computer literate than many older adults, and there could be perhaps a collaboration there. I don't know. But I would say this fall, though, with the high cost of fuel prices, I think people are going to maybe make a choice between whether they're going to heat their house or they're going to have cable. So some of this stuff really needs to be looked at, I think. I think that of our more poor people in town, and there are more than you realize, are going to have tough choices this fall. Now, are we talking expanding broadband hotspots in town, as opposed to just having it at just the schools or the town hall? Or are we thinking, in the downtown area where there doesn't need to be a password access? Is that what we're thinking?
That is correct. We're thinking of expanding locations that would have access. We would look, in terms of which locations, we want to look at what makes the most sense, obviously. But yes, it would be about expanding the number of locations that have broadband wireless access, broadband wired access, devices available to use, whether that's bring your own device or we provide a device, kiosks and so forth. Yes.
As well as increasing, I think, the range and the strength for areas that we currently have it right now.
No, that's true. That is also correct. There are some areas where we have very limited access, where maybe it's only indoors and not outdoors, or it's outdoors in a very limited scope.
Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. How come we're not doing this already? Are we a little behind the 8 ball on this? I mean, it's similar to equal access to buildings, ADA compliance. It's been, we've been kind of working on that since the 1970s. It's 2022 now. I'm curious if you think that we're behind on this initiative.
So we do some of it now. So some of it does occur. We do have, there are elements of this which we currently do. Some of it, for example, in broadband access, we do have some areas where we provide wireless access that's public and wired devices, kiosks, and so forth. We do have some programs where you can borrow devices, and we do, primarily through the public library, but also through other departments that do provide support to individuals and such. We just felt like we need to do more of it. We see that the need is significant, and really a lot of what's driving it is that not only with every year, but frankly with every month that passes, more and more things are only available online or primarily available online. Even really basic things. It's amazing how medical providers are a good example, where increasingly they won't give you paper records. You have to sign up for digital access. And you can only do that if you have an email account and a device and you understand how to navigate it. So our desire in bringing this forward is we feel like we do some of it, but we see that the need is growing.
Yeah, for years at the library, every time, and I don't mean to pick on the federal government, but I will, every time they decide to stop handing out paper for something, people come into the library looking for help. And so we've dealt with that, particularly with taxes. We love the IRS at the library. And we have seen more and more with the pandemic that just people need access. The first things we did, we were closed for a couple months, was get laptops and hotspots out to people. That's what they were looking for. And now with money that you've already approved for us, in fact, July 6th, we're getting 2 study pods for the library, and that's for anyone to be able to access the internet in a soundproof environment, because we have had people asking to be able to do telehealth, and they want us to help them get on, and then they can be alone and talk to their doctor. So we just see it happening more and more, and we are having, and we're happy to do so, help people more and more to access just some of the basics of life.
another piece that comes to mind with this that we hadn't mentioned, but would be good to mention. A lot of what's driving these ideas are smaller pieces that we have seen happening already, but we think need to happen more. A couple examples I'd give. During COVID, there were a lot of federal and state dollars for schools to benefit students. And so because the money was there and the support was there, we were able to really address every single family and narrow it down and partner with the schools. That was great and real successful, but that was tied to the dollars to those students. So it wasn't addressing other individuals in the community, but it kind of inspires us to do it. Another example we've seen was referenced to the senior center. We've had individuals who offer either classes or one-on-one tutoring or on demand. Senior centers provided some iPads for loaning. Again, that's been real effective, but there are limits to how many resources are there. And that's where we want to expand it. So we are seeing good things happening now, but we think more needs to happen. And to some extent, it's just getting more complicated, as you referenced those things around privacy.
Can we, instead of creating a position, can we cross-train staff across, the different disciplines that we have here in town? I was a security guard at University Library for 27 years, and I help people with Facebook, I help people locate books, I help people with databases, I help people with the catalog. I might get called to do CPR, so maybe a little cross-training and cooperation amongst staff.
That's actually part of the reason why we want to hire someone for 2 years, so we can see where the needs actually lie and then reconfigure and reconsider the staffing and the training to better meet those needs.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. To what extent is lack of access age-related? I mean, I used to say, "Where's my 12-year-old? I need a 12-year-old," and when concerns come about communication, everybody's saying there are always elderly people who can't do this. Does this still hold true?
It's not just the elderly, it's everybody, all ages, all walks of life. I've had people drive in a very expensive car with a very expensive smartphone and not know how to unlock it. Okay, so you may see, I think you've got the image in your head of the elderly person. I remember for a long time, we used to do one-on-ones with grandparents whose children and grandchildren would drop off the old computer at their house and say, "Here you go, Grandpa." And it's like putting a Ferrari in the driveway and asking you to just drive it. I'd crash into the garage. That kind of has gone by, and now what you're seeing is as the online world gets more complex, there's a barrier for everybody, including me, a librarian. You just hit a wall somewhere, whether it's you can't pay for the internet, whether your device is old, whether you don't have a device at all, or whether sometimes you're just looking at the website going, "My God, I do not understand what you're asking me to do." So it's across.
I think sometimes the web designers make it difficult. My second question has to do with devices. I've heard that there are kids who are trying to do homework on smartphones. Does this initiative address getting larger screens for people? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Katzenberger, followed by Mr. Osberger.
Follow-up, so I was looking, and I probably missed it, but where is how much funding are you recommending to provide to families that can't afford broadband? So it's a financial access, and they need it regularly.
Yeah, we're not actually looking to fund families. We're just pointing them to programs that do give them funds. So it's more an informational thing for us. We're not looking to be paying for their internet.
Is that funding considered, does that mostly come from the state or federal government? Isn't it likely to last? I mean, I wonder if we should have our own source, because that's, as Jamie pointed out, financial access is the major barrier for many.
It's federal money, and it's fairly robust. I think probably when we look at this, we're looking at going through a couple of years, and we expect to be learning So it could be that as part of the future funding that we may ask for some of these pots that Ryan has talked about, is that we would be able to ask for those things that we see are needed, and that could be one of those things.
As far as you know, have people said, okay, I've tried those sources, they won't give it to me? Have you had any, you may not, have you had that feedback?
People get them. Sometimes even with the supplement, they can't afford it.
Mr. Osberger?
There's a motion?
There is a motion on page 32.
All right,
Would you like to make it?
I would. I move to authorize the town manager to move forward with the implementation of the Digital Inclusion Initiative using ARPA funds as presented.
Is there a second? Mr. Bruder seconds. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Within all of the discussion I've heard today, I agree with everyone here. I think this is a wonderful plan. I think it is sorely needed. I think the presentation here was well-founded, and I learned a lot that I didn't know before with respect to people's needs. And within that, I think this is a fantastic initiative, and we should move forward.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak to this motion? Are we ready to vote? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Adopted unanimously. Congratulations, and thank you very much for all the work you've done on this.
And thank you from both of us.
All right, the next item on our agenda is recommendation for adjustments to the agency grant application process and guidance for the ARPA agency funding process. Mr. Aylesworth, I believe Ms. Schneider and Ms. Manzares are here and Ms. DeLapp.
Yeah, I'll briefly tee this up and then hand over to Pat, who will further tee it up. But so as the council knows, there's been, I'm sure it predated my time here, probably goes back many years, but certainly in the two budget cycles that I've been a part of, there's been at various times conversations or expressed desire from a member of the council to look at our annual funding, both the application, but also the criteria, and basically our whole approach to how we the town, currently provide funding support to area agencies, social service agencies. And so to that end, recognizing that there was a desire expressed by council members to look at the process and see if there was a better way or what the best way, quote unquote, would be, Human Services staff under Pat's leadership, as well as the Human Services Advisory Committee, and I understand that there's some new members, new additions to the Human Services Advisory Committee that have been real contributors here right out of the gate, have some thoughts to share with the council, as well as seek council feedback on the other piece of this equation, which is not just the annual sort of quote-unquote recurring agency funding, but also this one-time funding that's been contemplated and proposed and embraced by the council under the American Rescue Plan. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Pat to kind of further facilitate this.
Welcome. And welcome to the other members of your team. I see Ms. Nemirovsky has joined us as well.
Correct. They, the Human Service Advisory Council really took to heart.
Ms. Schneider, would you just hold on a second? I think Ms. Patwa is also part of your team. Would you like to come
Yes.
forward so you can?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. So the committee has really been kind of taking a hard look at not only the agency funding policy, but our annual funding policy, but also, the consideration that the council has allocated some funds for one-time agency grants through the ARPA funds. So they're here tonight to go through some of their recommendations of the changes in the process, as well as to get some input from the council and direction as far as the ARPA fund and your thoughts on that. So I'll turn it over to our chair, Ethel, and we have the other members here also who will be contributing. So.
Before Ms. Manzares begins, there is no specific proposal in our agenda, so.
Yeah, actually, there was a
I
proposal
got it.
that was handed out. Okay, all right. Okay, Ethel, you're muted.
Please proceed.
Okay, sorry about that. Well, thank you. What I'm going to do is turn it over to Julie, and she's going to go through the process that we went through and give you our ideas as what we think should be changed. And Shameen is there to offer any comments, and Vicky also, Ms. Nemirovsky. So, Julie?
All right, thanks. Thanks, Ethel, and thank you to members of the council for letting us do this, particularly virtually. So you have in your packet on page 41 a very brief synopsis of what the issue was that we've discussed, and then a handout that you received this afternoon. And the first page of it gives a brief sort of narrative of what the issue is and our proposal, but then we also thought it would be helpful to have a graphic that makes it very clear what the current process is and what we are proposing to make it clear what the difference is. So what I wanted to explain is that right now we have a process where in the fall an RFP is issued, and and that's out for local agencies to respond to. And that includes information about their eligibility criteria, but it doesn't include the other kinds of information that are often in RFPs that you see from the federal government, from the state, from big foundations. So it doesn't include what is the range of awards that we expect to give. It doesn't have the total amount of awards, the number of awards. And to date, it hasn't typically included sort of funding priorities. It just has, these are the kinds of things that are eligible for the funding. And so that goes out in the fall, and then the committee receives the applications and we review them, and then we make recommendations on what agencies to fund and the amounts. But because agencies aren't given any information about what the range of funding awards is, they don't really have the guidance to know what is appropriate to request. And so this year we received proposals that ranged from $1,000 to $18,000. And many of the agencies who applied asked for the exact same amount that they had received the year before, whereas others asked for substantially more. And that left the committee in the position of how do we determine what's fair to recommend to allocate if the agencies weren't given any information about what would be appropriate to request. And then the next step is we make those recommendations, we turn them over to the town council, and then as part of the budget process, you make the final determination for what will be awarded. And the agencies typically get their funding in August. So our recommendation after having a discussion and subcommittee meeting on this is to change the timeline a little bit, but it would not affect very much the timeline on when agencies received their funding. So the second graphic shows our proposal for what the new timeline would look like. And basically, the main difference here is that we would, what we're recommending is that the town council make a decision as part of the budgeting process for how much they expect to be able to award to local agencies. And that information is included in the RFP. And the RFP, instead of going out in the fall, would go out shortly after the budget is adopted by the town. And it would include, this is the total amount of funding that is expected to be awarded, and this is sort of the recommended range for awards. And as well, we would also recommend that that when appropriate and when the town council believes that it makes sense, that we would include sort of recommendations for what the funding priorities would be. So for instance, one of the things that we've discussed is that mental health is a huge issue. So we may want to decide that for next year's RFP, that is a priority funding area. That wouldn't mean that it's the only thing that is funded, but if we get more applications than we can fund, that perhaps agencies who are proposing those kinds of services would get extra points for that. So then once the RFP goes out and the applications come back in, we would score them according to a rubric. We would send our recommendations back to the town council as we do now, for you to give final approval. And then the expectation is that agencies could get the funding sometime in September. So the other benefit to this is it would shrink substantially the amount of time between when agencies submitted their proposal and when they got the funding. So from now it's like 9 to 10 months, and this would be considerably shorter. Do any of the other committees want to add to that?
Mayor?
No, just that, you know.
Wait, one moment, please, Mr. Shaken.
Seeing Vic on the screen, I just realized that I should recuse myself from this unofficially, at least. I don't have a technical conflict of interest, but I work for the Connecticut Community Nonprofit Alliance, and the nonprofit that Victoria runs is one of our members, and I have traditionally stayed out of discussions around the technicalities of who gets what in this fund for that reason, even though I don't have a technical conflict, so I'm going to do that on this one as well.
What about process? Do you, rather than
I love this process, but I'm going to otherwise stay out of it.
So will you participate in the discussion of process?
I'll just say that I think it's great, but I'm going to otherwise stay out of it.
Okay, all right. All right, thank you, Mr. Shaken. Are you going to excuse yourself, or?
I can listen. I don't have a real conflict.
Okay.
I'm not going to provide my opinion.
Okay.
Julia did a wonderful job of summarizing our discussion. I think we started out not having enough guidance in terms of where do we allot this money to. And it's all about being equitable. There are organizations, just like Julia said, who didn't ask for more because they didn't know they could. So this will kind of bring a little more transparency to the process, and it'll definitely help our committee in understanding what our charge is and where we need to prioritize.
Do any of you have anything to say? Are you open for questions? Ms. Nemorowski?
I just wanted to add that the real beauty of what I see in this change is that it gives us an opportunity to really look at what some of the priorities are, which we have not been able to do in the past, and align our RFP with what those priorities are. And I think that will just help make a greater impact.
And if the council can tell us what their priorities are and what they would like to see, what kind of services they like to see funded, that would be a great help too.
Ms. Schneider?
I also like to add that the time of year that we send out those applications is a really challenging time for the nonprofits to get them back. The holidays for many of them are times when they have heavy duty expectations on their programs, as well as they often have board members and other people that are out of town for the holidays. So there's been some challenges even with things like getting signatures, pulling stuff together and that. So I think that probably the putting it out in the spring, late spring, early summer will be easier for the agencies, and there will be less time, because we're really sending them applications before the budget process starts, and also telling them that, the money may or may not be available. Whereas if it's already approved, the money's already there. So when you're sending that out, so that's a little easier on agencies as well.
Thank you. So I would assume that a motion would be to adopt the recommendation for the revised RFP process that's on the first page of the handout?
Correct.
All right. Do council members have questions? Mr. Bruder?
Thank you, Mayor. I mostly want to just comment that I also like the proposed process where it's going to be shortened period of time from the application period till funds are received. And the job that you took from what we were saying before in regards to wanting more transparency, really feels like it's reflected in this proposal, so thank you. I don't have any specific questions other than to say thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Katzenberger?
Thanks. Just, and this is in part, I guess, a question for Ryan. So on the proposed process, which makes a lot more sense than what we're doing now, I guess, town council in April, May makes a decision on funding priorities, allocates total amount for local agency funding. I guess, will we think have enough information to make an intelligent decision on how much, 60,000, 100,000, whatever it is, do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, so I guess I'd look at it this way. I mean, that piece of it, every year during the budget process, the town council has to determine as part of that process how much money is going to be made available to agencies, right? So the difference, of course, is being proposed is not to sort of narrow in on this list of agencies and this amount, but to set a bottom line, this total amount, these types of priorities, and then the actual funding decisions happen later. So I guess I would argue there's, from a budget impact standpoint, there's really no change because, the order of events is a little bit reversed, but I mean, you still have to decide now what total amount is appropriate. It's just you're basically starting with data, if you want to call it that, in the form of a request from the agencies. And so, if the council, which has obviously historically been the case, you're generally supportive of the work the agencies are doing, and there's this sort of tendency to, basically approve a number that's very similar to what's been done in the past, I guess I would say that the first year that this new process is employed, if to the extent that the council is potentially contemplating, going further or deeper in the total amount of money made available, there probably would be some soul searching on the council's part to be done. But once that's done, I think subsequent years probably becomes a lot easier.
I just have one other question.
Go ahead.
Thanks. No, that makes sense. Thank you. So and I just don't know the process well enough for this area, but is there, I'm trying, especially when the funds are requested are pretty low, like you need to get the information, but I always hate the idea of asking some entity to fill out pages and pages of information for a $2,000 grant. If money may be tight, but staff time is typically even tighter. Is there a general application that the state of Connecticut or that some accredited nonprofit agency uses? I mean, can we, or should, I mean, this is really a question for you. Can we move or should we move to an application that is very, that basically gets the, that general application other towns use, and then we can add a few Mansfield special questions. I would think, but you tell me, that would reduce the burden, if it doesn't already exist, that would reduce the burden on these agencies, which are asking multiple entities for money. Thank you.
Ms. Nurowski, go ahead.
I just wanted to respond to that, if I might. As someone who writes a lot of grant requests, there is a common application that the Connecticut Council on Philanthropy puts forth, but the application that we have now through Mansfield is actually much less paperwork and much less cumbersome than what you would get through the Council of Philanthropy. But I think also that is one thing that we have looked at in the past is how we can tweak this application to even make it, more user friendly and still get the information that we need to make the good decisions.
I have a question. One of the jobs that you would hand to the council under this proposal is a new job for us, and that is setting the priorities for funding, like deciding this year we're going to do housing, this year we're going to do mental health, what else? I would hope that the Human Services Committee would have some proposals based on your experience rather than having us invent it out of thin air. Because all we know is what we encounter in our normal lives, and I think the cross-agency, cross-age range experience that your committee has, would be extraordinarily valuable in helping us develop that. Ms. Patla?
I could respond to that, and I'm sure Ethel does too, but you hit the nail on the head. Even in this funding process that we just undertook, all of us are relatively new to the committee role, and everyone brought their own perspective, and we had a very robust discussion of where are we placing our money, what's important right now. And each of us had lenses from which to share that information. So yes, there'd be recommendations coming.
Thank you. Any other council members have questions? Would somebody like to put the motion on the floor, please? Mr. Osberger.
Now, in reading this, am I to create a motion based on the recommendations?
Why don't you just say the council endorses the recommendations for a revised RFP process presented at our June 13th town council meeting? Yeah.
I move that the recommendation for the revised RFP process as spoken at the June 13th, 22 town meeting be adopted for alternative funding timeline beginning fiscal year 2024.
Is there a second to Mr. Osberger's motion? Mr. Kotchenberger, second. Blanking on your name, sorry. Too many syllables, that's all. Okay, any further discussion of this motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you for this work. It is unanimous. Thank you for this work. I think this sounds like a much better,
I'm abstaining. It's not unanimous.
okay, I'm sorry.
Just before we transition, there was the American Rescue Plan piece of this as well. So I didn't know.
Right.
Oh,
Are you suggesting that we use the same process for American Rescue Fund? So it'd just be a different RFP with different sets of objectives, different amounts of money, but it would be the same process?
I think so, yeah.
All right, so this revised request for proposals process for agency grants would be for our annual requests and also for the special ARPA monies.
Great.
And we need to put that in the minutes just in case it wasn't clear in the motion.
And the only thing that I would add to that is the committee has been looking at the American Rescue Plan and the priorities that are listed under there in the funding, because as we know, they might be slightly different.
Yes.
From the regular area agency grant application. So we're aware of that, what those priorities are, and so the RFP would reflect that.
Right, I assume that our motion only established a process, that it did not, and that it's for two separate pots of money.
Correct.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you very much for the work you've done and for showing up tonight, and we look forward to the next stage.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
One quick question, this is June. When will we get the first request for priorities for the ARPA money? Maybe that process needs to be on a somewhat different timetable.
I know we had talked about, we would like to move forward with that for the fall. That was one of the things, so, but there is some work that needs to be done prior to that, so.
Okay, so we wouldn't get the suggestion for priorities until September?
I would, that, again, I'll let the chair address that.
We have addressed, in our discussions, as Shanine said, it was a robust discussion as to what we think should be funded here in town. So we do have some ideas.
And I was also under the impression that there would be some guidance. There's guidance inherent within the ARPA funding to begin with. So we actually have some guidelines in place before we even get to them.
All right, I think we need a motion that this process will have a different calendar for the ARPA money, a calendar to be determined by the Human Services Advisory Committee. Would somebody like to make that motion? Here's the thing. We have adopted a procedure which begins in February. But I think for the ARPA money, we want to begin earlier than that. Well, we don't have to, but we would like to get this money out within the fiscal year. We have money that can be spent this year. So I think in addition to the motion to adopt this process, we need to allow for an expedited calendar just for the ARPA money.
And I guess I would offer that at this moment, I don't know, as far as because again, this is essentially a one-time exercise when it comes to rescue plan. So it's really a different discussion because it's one time, it's not something that's gonna be ongoing. So I think, we made the council has signaled its desire for the next budget year to shift out or change the cycle in accordance with the recommendations, which takes some of the pressure, so to speak, off the fall, because the fall is now going to be a busy time for the regular agency requests. So it basically would come down to, agencies are used to submitting their requests in the fall. So this one time, essentially during the fall, the rescue plan requests would replace their normal time frame for submitting a request for the annual appropriation. So I think if the committee came back to you all, I'll say late summer, I'm not going to, paint the committee into a corner with a date, but perhaps the council's meeting in August, maybe there could be an opportunity to have an additional discussion at that point and finalize what the RFP would look like for publication and responses in the fall. But staff, I think, can work on that. I think the council's general direction is pretty clear.
Okay.
And we also know the amount of money already, the $350,000.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, we will wait for a recommendation from Human Services and from staff about the calendar for the ARPA money distribution. Mr. Osberger.
May remind me again, it seems to have slipped my mind, when the ability to spend the money on the ARPA money sunsets.
We have to have it committed by 24 and spent by 26.
Okay.
Am I correct?
Calendar years, yep.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. And the next item on our agenda is the appointment of a town historian. Now, you folks may remember that Roberta Smith was the town historian for many, many years. Her death at 101 was a loss to the town. We celebrated her 100th birthday with parades and all kinds of things, but we have never replaced her. I asked the Historical Society if they could make a recommendation, and I have received this letter. On May 12, 2022, the Executive Board of the Mansfield Historical Society voted unanimously to recommend Rudy Favretti to be the town's next municipal historian. Mr. Favretti's knowledge of Mansfield history is incomparable. He played a large role in producing the Society's first publication, The Chronology of Mansfield, Connecticut, 1702 to 1972, revised up to 2002, and is the author or co-author of many subsequent publications, including books on Mansfield Center, Mansfield Four Corners, Wormwood Hill, Gurleyville and Hanks Hill, and Mansfield Depot and Merrow. He still hasn't gotten to Mansfield Hollow. That's my request. Mr. Favretti has been a Mansfield resident since his undergraduate days. For 30 years, he taught landscape architecture and was a landscape planning specialist with a focus on restoration of gardens at historic sites, including Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. He is nationally known for his academic writings, and his practical guide, Landscapes and Gardens for Historic Buildings, has gone through 3 editions. In addition to being one of the earliest members of the Mansfield Historical Society, Mr. Favretti was a founder of Joshua's Trust, Conservation and Historic Trust, Served for many years on the Mansfield Planning and Zoning Commission, most recently as chair before stepping back from public service. And that's just part of the letter. So on our agenda, there's a motion to appoint Mr. Favretti, and it's on page 43. Mr. Kotchenberger.
I move effective June 13th, 2022, to appoint Rudy J. Favretti as the new town historian with all the privileges and responsibilities that pertain to the office.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Osberger. Would you like to speak to your motion, Mr. Kotchenberger?
Thank you. Just briefly, because you've already well described Mr. Favretti's work and his commitment to Mansfield. I have personally seen and had the privilege of working with him on planning and zoning for years, including when he was the chair of that committee. And Mansfield is very fortunate to have him and his family in our town and still and willing to and continuing to serve. So I am very proud to make this motion, and I, of course, urge everyone to support it.
Anybody else wish to comment? Are we ready to vote? All those in favor of Mr. Kotchenberger's motion, please raise your hand. And this one is unanimous. Thank you. And congratulations, Mr. Favretti. We look forward to hearing from you on occasion. Mansfield Hollow. Mansfield Hollow.
Subtle, isn't she?
Okay, next item is the ARPA funding allocation for the Quint apparatus. Mr. Aylesworth.
As the council will recall, the town of Mansfield received a 2020 Small Cities Community Development Block Grant for $900,000. Well, originally it was less. Eventually, it was adjusted by CTDOH, Department of Housing, up to $900,000 to fund the acquisition of a new fire apparatus. This Quint, as it's called, it serves. Has 5 different functions, hence the Quint. It's also sometimes referred to as a aerial pumper. But in any case, we went out to bid, and because it's state money, you know, anytime you go out to bid for an apparatus like this, it's going to get complex. But because state funding is involved, procedurally, you have to be really tight, really careful, really well define what it is that you're looking to procure. And so we went through the procurement process. We received a handful of proposals from vendors that build these sorts of apparatus. Obviously, I won't go into all the details of the various submissions, other than to say every submission we received, and this was sort of alluded to in your packet, everything was over budget. All the bids came in over budget. And the preferred vendor, it's a vendor called Bulldog, excuse me, their particular bid is roughly $259,000 over our available budget. They weren't the low bid, but of those that, you know, everybody was over, based on a wide range of criteria that were spelled out in the bid package, and the fact that they definitely bid on the specifications the most accurately. That was another problem we had, was some of the bids that came in a little under where Bulldog was. They did not bid on the exact specs that we provided, and so by the time they adjusted all of their bids to account for the correct specs, they, in all likelihood, would not have been the lower bid. So in any case, we have this gap funding to try to make up. And this is an apparatus, certainly, that the fire department feels very strongly it needs. And we believe in the long run it'll save the town money, because it'll, and I believe the fire chief commented on this or presented on this in a previous meeting, will allow us to replace certain apparatus. So there will be a cost savings in the long run by acquiring this apparatus now. Not just the fact that it's grant funded, but also the fact that it'll replace the need to maintain and ultimately replace other apparatus that we currently have in our fire station. So with all that said, staff is recommending that this funding shortfall in the amount of $258,750 be made up with ARPA grant funds, more specifically the American Rescue Plan grant funds that the town council already authorized in the form of replacement of lost revenue. You'll remember back in March that was it was actually $1,125,000 that the town council approved for that purpose. And so this would come out of that chunk of ARPA funds that the council already acted on. That's the staff recommendation. I'll stop there just to see if Jen Kaufman, who normally this would have been something that Linda Painter would have presented on, but since Jen's there, Jen, I don't know if there's anything from a grant administration standpoint that you want to touch on?
Hi. I don't think so. I think Ryan summed it up very well. I think that we basically need to get this, we need to understand where the funding shortfall is going to come from, and we do need to sign the contract pretty quickly. But other than that, that's
Excuse me 1 minute, Ms. Kaufman, we can't hear. I mean, we can hear you, but the volume is too low. Can you turn your volume up?
I think Jamie just has to turn it up in the room. I think he's working on it.
okay.
Oh, right.
Is it?
Okay, say something. We'll see if you're loud enough.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I forgot we ran into this in the finance committee
Yeah.
meeting. So I don't know, Jen, I think it's your microphone might be a little faint.
I'm sorry about that. Well, if you can hear me at all, I think Ryan summed it up. I think we need to sign the contract in order for the prices not to go up by Thursday. And we do need to find funding for this budget shortfall. So I'm not sure if you can, but Ryan really summed it up well.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. That was the one other element, was there's a time-sensitive aspect, right? The vendor's not going to be holding its pricing beyond Thursday.
All right, the motion for this is on page 50.
Excuse me, Madam Mayor. I'm considering actually joining the volunteer fire department, so I'm going to recuse myself here.
Okay, Mr. Coleman. We need volunteer firefighters. That's a great thing to do. So there's a motion on page 50 to authorize this allocation. Mr. Bruder?
I'll make that motion if you.
Go ahead.
Move effective June 13th, 2022 to authorize the allocation of $258,750 from the ARPA funds for the balance of the project as noted above.
Is there a second? Mr. Osberger seconds. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Just to say that, a large part of this is being covered by a grant, and it had our support previously, and I want to make sure that, we get the right equipment as recommended by staff.
Did anybody else wish to speak to this motion? Ready to vote? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And with the exception of Mr. Coleman, who has abstained, we are unanimous. Thank you. All right, now, the next stuff on the agenda, wait a second.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay, now, reports of council committees. There were 3 items that were previously in the consent agenda that Mr. Coleman requested be moved. And so since these recommendations had come out of the Finance Committee, I've asked that the Finance Committee report on it. But since not all the Finance Committee members are present, oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Coleman is back. Okay. So let's start with Finance.
Okay, so at a meeting, earlier meeting.
Mike on.
All right. At an earlier meeting tonight, Finance, we looked at and voted to approve the 3 recommendations that were originally on the consent agenda, and that is the transfer of uncollected taxes to property, appointment of auditors, and proposed capital improvement program adjustments for fiscal year 21-22. We'll, since they're now up for discussion, I put a motion on the floor, which I guess for the first one was go in the order that they're in the packet. And this is the appointment of the auditor, which is the memo starts on page 11 of our packet, and the motion's on 12. And I move effective June 13th, 2022, to appoint CLE LLP as the auditing firm for the fiscal year, and that's a typo, but it should be 2021, 2022. And I don't think we need a second.
Doesn't need a second. Comments on the motion?
I'll ask if well, we can have questions first, or if Charmaine, our finance director, wants to.
My recollection of this, and you can speak to this, is that this has come out of some discussions that occurred last year about retaining the same auditor, given all of the changes that have been ongoing, and would you
Yes.
carry on from there, and then?
Yes, and in part, this is also partly an extension beyond the time, because we haven't issued requests for proposals, or put this contract out for bid for a number of years. So as this is to continue the agreement, but with the expectation that the town will put out the bid. The bid for subsequent year, we'll start working on that, or more accurately, the finance department will start working on that in likely November, December. So this is to conclude the rest of the year. I'll turn it over to either questions or Charmaine, whichever people prefer.
Well, let's start with questions. Mr. Osberger.
I just have a comment that it seems as if we've used this company for a number of years, and I would be of the opinion that we should have another set of eyes looking at things, given the history that going forward from, we had our superintendent of schools, and that wasn't really picked up by the audit, other eyes to find that. And so I think certainly another pair of eyes, perhaps another company putting it out for bid would be in order at this point.
Mr. Coleman.
Yeah, how do we arrive at choosing our auditor? Do we put it out to bid?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, it's put out to bid. I think the last time was 2016-17. I'm looking at the memo and from our discussion, and a 3-year contract was awarded, and then in part because of, well, largely because of COVID, as well as the significant additional work required, the familiarity with our current auditor, which was Blum Shapiro. Blum Shapiro was acquired by CLA, Clifton Larson Allen, but it's the same. Blum Shapiro is the company we won the bid in 2000, or we awarded the bid to in 2016-17, and they continue under a different company to service the account. And then the idea, of course, is to put it out to bid for the next year.
I agree
but
with
not at this, but not in the next 3 or 4 months.
I agree with Councilor Osberger that it wouldn't hurt to have a different set of eyes on our books. Thank you.
Any other comment? Mr. Bruder.
This came out of the Finance Committee. I was just curious, was it unanimous or was it?
It was unanimous.
Split vote. Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? We have a motion on the floor. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. And all of those opposed, please raise your hand. So the vote, there are 2 nays and 5 yays. Oh, yeah, 6 yays. 6 yays, my apologies. I can't count. All right, the next item, keep going, Mr. Kachenberger.
Okay, and again, there will be a new set of potentially, certainly a new proposal, new request for, for bid that will go out early next year, but we'll start development at the end of this year. The second item in the page, starting on page 15 of the packet, is proposed capital improvement program adjustments for this year. And this is essentially, this is not any request for additional money. This is explaining various adjustments, but increases in several projects and where that money is proposed to come from. And for this, I will turn it over to Charmaine. If anything, or do you want to have questions?
Why don't you put the motion on the
Nope,
floor,
nope.
see if there are questions, and then where we need to go.
Motion's on page 15. I move effective June 13th, 2022, to recommend to the town council to approve the adjustments to the capital projects fund as presented by the Director of Finance in the correspondence dated June 6, 2022. And this was a also unanimously approved recommendation by the Finance Committee.
Okay, questions from council members? Mr. Shaken?
Just a comment that in general, the Finance Committee, not every month, but many months, deals with a number of technical adjustments to the town's budget. This is one of them, and a reminder to all of my fellow councilors that they are usually non-controversial, but there is a fair amount of detail that staff go into, regardless of the level of controversy, at the Finance Committee meeting, which is open to all councilors. Something that could allow us to handle some of this very routine business on consent agendas in the future.
Any other comments? All right, are we ready to vote? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And this is adopted unanimously. Mr. Kotchenberger, on to the next one.
And the third. Thank you. Third is the item is the transfer of uncollected taxes to property tax suspension book, another activity that we do typically yearly. This is the memo and motion are on page 17. I'll put it up and then just speak very briefly. I move effective June 13th, 2022 to transfer $78,082.46 in uncollected property taxes to the Mansfield Property Tax Suspense Book as recommended by the Collector of Revenue. And to speak to that briefly, the memo, of course, explains it, but we're not forgiving this money. What we're doing is remains, I believe, collectible for 15 years. What we're doing is largely an accounting procedure to have it off to have it off of the amount of money that we're expected to collect. I'm not sure what the best term is. What's that? Yeah. Accounts receivable, right. And this is, and we actually, and notable in all this is that we have a 98% tax collection rate, which is high for any operation, I think, very high. And particularly so given Mansfield has higher than its own, typical share of, very transient population, students, and especially for motor vehicle taxes. So this moves it out of the accounts collectible and, but does not alter the debt. The debt remains unpaid and potentially collectible through at least the state statute of limitations.
Mr. Coleman.
Yeah, so how is this actually accounted for? I mean, this is probably money that we needed in a previous year budget and didn't come up with. So how's the actual accounting work with unpaid taxes? It's money that you were expecting in a yearly budget and you didn't receive it. So how is that allocated for? Yeah, it's.
So
What I'm saying is we were expecting it in another fiscal year.
Correct.
And it was a shortfall because we didn't collect it.
Correct.
So how is that shown on the books, I guess?
So when, in the quarterly financial statements, there is, every quarter, we provide the what has been taken in versus what has been billed over the course of that quarter in the collector's summary. So you can see how the money is coming in over the course of the year by those quarterly financial statements.
Mr. Shaken?
can I ask Counselor Coleman's question a different way? I think this might be what he's getting at. When we make our budget, do we account for collecting less than 100% of the taxes? And if we do,
Yes.
how? How?
So in our levy, so when you determine what the mill rate is, it's accounted for in that calculation as well. So when you look at your budget and you see how the levy is determined, it is accounted for in that space.
So do we budget, if we have a 98% collection rate, do we look at history to assume we will collect approximately 98% of the taxes that we levy in order
Correct.
to understand how much revenue we can expect to take in?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Any further questions? Ready to vote? All those in favor of the motion to forgive, not to forgive, but to remove collectible taxes from accounts receivable? We are not forgiving. We are very unforgiving. Thank you. It's unanimous. Thank you. Yeah. All right.
I was just, the only other thing.
Oh, go ahead.
No, just. The only, I thought, yeah, I don't know. He's having that problem. The only other thing to note, I think, from the Finance Committee is the petroleum agreement recommendations. And just to summarize, we typically, for years, have gone to yearly contracts for the purchase of diesel, a yearly set to fix the rate for the purchase of heating oil, petroleum, and gas. The recommendation of our energy consultant is, not surprisingly, not to do that right now, given the very high rates, but to wait perhaps up to 6 to 7 months to see if the rates go down and stabilize. If not, we may have to lock them in, but this is not the time to agree to a yearly contract at, the highest point it's been in quite a while, if ever. So that's, we don't need a motion on that, but that's just simply to let people know where we stand on this.
That sounds like a crapshoot, actually.
There's always some guesswork. Things can get worse. But, we're at a historical high, I believe, and we'll see. But yes, there is a certain amount of guesswork in this. But thankfully, we have an energy consultant who that's their business, so.
Anything else? All right. Personnel Committee?
We're working on the evaluation of the town manager, and the schedule is that we are going to discuss further the proposed instrument at our meeting on the 27th, and pursuant to the mayor's suggestion, which actually I dismissed, but actually turns out to be a very good one. Any member of the council, welcome at the Personnel Committee. And this would be a good opportunity not to be under the same time constraint that we're under when we have a full council meeting to discuss that questionnaire. I have some sample questions that I'll be happy to share with people, and if you wanted to email any suggestions to me, I'd be happy to incorporate that into kind of a draft that we could discuss on the 27th. We would then take that thing that we would approve at the Personnel Committee, and at the next council meeting, give it to the council for final approval at that point. And then we have a schedule working from there on for the process, leading to the final conclusion of the process at toward the end of October.
Mr. Shuren, that will be a hybrid meeting? So if people can't actually,
Yeah.
council members have another obligation, you can sign in via Zoom or whatever we're using these
Yeah.
days.
Somewhat easier when people are present because they have the document in front of them, but yes,
Right.
it'll be a
But
hybrid
could you
meeting.
once again, email the proposals?
Yeah,
It's buried on my
yeah. And I'd be
email list.
happy to, for your use, share the kind of questionnaire as I envision it, but that's just my thoughts. Make a copy if you wish.
Thank you. Committee on committees.
We met on Thursday, and we're working on some revision of charges.
Thank you. No action from the council needed. All right. Departmental and advisory committee reports? No comments? Petitions, requests, and communications?
items. We're not
Okay,
there
wait a
yet.
second,
Yeah.
we'll get there. Future agendas, I think we need to take a look at the panhandling question at some point. Future agendas, anything else for future agendas?
If it's not too burdensome, and perhaps it is, it would be, and this goes to what Jamie and the presentation earlier, it would be useful to know what was the participation rate of residents watching the online, the town council's online pre-COVID with what they are, say, now, or last month, or whatever, to see how much of a, increase has resulted, or decrease, whatever the numbers are. But it'd be good to get, we hear and it makes sense that, in fact, one of the few benefits of COVID is that there's a greater willingness to consider online formats, online participation, and this is a chance, if the data is available, to see what that means in Mansfield.
Just to clarify, are you thinking specifically live stream or including those that, because I mean, obviously you could watch back a meeting that's recorded forever. So
Can we do both?
I'm going to defer to Jamie, but I just wanted to make sure I understood it sounded like maybe you're thinking more like the live
I
stream
was thinking
piece,
of that, but both
didn't-
could be, it may be broken out. Again, assuming that data, already exists, and certainly not suggesting we
So we're looking for pre-pandemic and current data on viewers of the live stream, and also data on the numbers of people who've been watching our hybrid meetings.
if that's possible.
And we have a cable provider. I don't. Yep.
What's that? Yeah.
Short answer is yes, there is some data, and we could put that together.
Okay.
So,
As we emerge from the pandemic, because we have live meetings only recently to see how things go. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Osberger.
This is just per one of the comments that's on part of the petitions and everything. One of the members had asked something about a study. We're in the middle of doing a study for the Northwest Hunting Lodge neighborhoods, right? Still? I think we added
Yeah.
some extra rows to that or something, as I recall.
Yeah, so the council at the last meeting, you authorized use of rescue plan funds for that study, but we need to, or that plan, but a number of pertinent variables like the exact geographic scope and all that is still
Right.
TBD.
So perhaps now that she's watching, she can see that we are in fact.
Taking decisive action and moving
Yeah.
forward on it.
Okay.
All right. The next item is an executive session. Would somebody move us into executive session? Mr. Shaken?
Yes, I move to enter a new executive session in accordance with Connecticut General Statutes, Section 1-206C, to discuss our cybersecurity strategy and to invite to that executive session Ryan Aylesworth, Jamie Russell, and I'm going to guess Ashley Rada and Mallory Monaco. Yes?
I believe those are our insurance broker representatives. Yeah,
Yes,
Charmaine's
okay,
nodding.
to invite those individuals to executive session. Yes.
Is there a
So
second?
one other, I just sent a text message to Kevin Deneen. He had said he was going to join in anticipation of being invited, but he has not joined yet. So maybe if we could give him just a few
And
seconds.
Attorney Deneen.
If he joins, yeah.
That's my motion.
A second, please. Seconded by Mr. Bruder. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, we're going into executive session. We'll take a 5-minute break while everything gets cleared out.
Have we made a motion to move out of executive session?
We don't need a motion. We just come out. Yes. We're just waiting for the recording to be on. All right, we've had an executive session in which we discussed liability insurance, and there is a motion on the materials you have. Mr. Shaken?
I'll make the motion, move effective. Are we recording? Are we live? Looks like the recording is paused. It looks like you can. I think you can just press play.
Recording in progress.
All right, I will make the motion, move effective today to increase the FY 21-22 general fund general liability insurance account funded by the additional state pilot grant by $40,000.
Mr. Osberger seconds. Do you wish to speak to your motion, Mr. Shaken?
This reflects our conversation in executive session related to our security policy, and I hope you will all support it.
Mr. Katzenberger, briefly, please.
Of course. Only if 40,000, if we're going with option 2, is
Yes.
whether we need to do a little more because of, no, we're okay with option 2? Great. Thank you.
Well, we're appropriating the correct amount of money, so I think that'll do it. Mr. Bruder. Okay, are we ready to vote? All those in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. Okay. I think we've lost Mr. Frattoni. Okay.
He was gone in executive session. He wasn't there.
All right. The next item on the agenda is a motion to adjourn.
So
Would
moved.
somebody, Mr. Shaken moves, Mr. Katzenberger seconds. All, okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mallory and Ashley.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Recording stopped.